And
I've never used this platform before. It's pretty nice.
It's on. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live episode of To the Moon, Allison, where we talk about the top and trending works in fantasy, science fiction, speculative fiction, and romance. And I cannot believe, okay, I will stop the bee puns now. You probably can see that I'm wearing these
all night.
There is
People
a
coming
for it. But I am so excited to be joined by debut author Rachel Fikes, fantasy author of Keeper of Sorrows, out now from Flame Tree Press. Isn't this beautiful? Okay, so you can probably see that there is a bee there. Rachel has bees on her, but she's way more subtle than I am, who's wearing, I believe these are child's bees wings. But
they were
the main theme, and then one of the main things, is this is a world where there is no more wind, and the bees and the birds, see, if I say it that way, it doesn't sound dirty, but these
right.
pollinators, and they are huge. And the person who is like the chief beekeeper of kind of the entire realm is the most powerful person on the planet. So I decided to have that power today. I just usurped that. I didn't go through any trials. I just put this on and said, I'm it, bitch. So there we go. I'm the bee. Queen bee. I'm really not queen bee. I'm not that important.
You
But
wouldn't really want to be the queen bee, to be honest, because the queen really isn't the queen. She just pops out babies, and then when she stops performing, the other bees kill her. So when people say queen bee, I'm like, no, you really don't want that job.
I got 3 of them. I think my time is done. The three babies, as I have here. But
there
that's
you
like
go.
one part here of Keeper of Sorrows. And Rachel, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll talk about Keeper of Sorrows and your publishing journey, because you and I have known each other for a few years, and the publishing journey, some people have it easy. I wouldn't say you were one of those people. I know I am not one of those people. So we can, share the tea on some of that and talk about how that goes. So Rachel, tell us about yourself and Keeper of Sorrows.
Yeah, so I grew up in a small town in Texas, Fredericksburg. Well, everyone knows it now, but it's really touristy. But when I was there, no one knew it, so we would say that we were from Austin. But farm kid, agriculture, 4-H, FFA, that's what put me through university. In fact, my undergraduate degree is agricultural journalism from Texas A&M. Yes, there is a degree called agricultural journalism.
Is
So
it basically you go to county fairs and tell about the biggest pumpkins and pigs? Because that's awesome. But I think there's probably more to it than that.
Yeah, well, so there wasn't at Texas A&M, there wasn't a college of journalism, but the journalism school was housed in the College of Agriculture, and I loved writing, and I loved agriculture, and I was like, wow, let's combine them, let's do it. Have the most useless degree ever, so that when you graduate during the great financial crisis of 2008, you can't get a job anywhere, so you join the army.
That's just really niche, and I'm guessing like the army probably didn't have use for that either.
Really, but they do have a public affairs functional, but you can't get into that until you're like a major.
Okay.
And yeah, that's a long time that you're like, I got out when I was actually, I got pinned captain, and then I was like out like the next day.
Am I supposed
So
to salute you now?
what's that? No, please don't. Please don't.
I used to work for, I won't say what agency, but I used to work for an agency where we also saluted, and our salute was a little bit different than that. But I also wore a uniform, no B wings, and there were also ranks. I didn't have a rank, but again, I'm used to this, and then I think this is a little different. But I know that if you're not in it, you're not supposed to salute people. I don't think I understand most of it. But I was thinking the agriculture part, that probably wasn't something the Army was super interested in for you.
I mean, they do have like so many different functional areas that you could go into. Like, well, the guys I ended up working with, they were really smart tech guys, way smarter than me. And when we branch, it's actually a really funny story. I wasn't even supposed to be in that particular branch. Like, officer candidate school, whoever does the best, they get like the best picks, So mine were military intelligence. That sounds cool, right? Or military police. Or I really liked field artillery, but field artillery for a woman at that time, I would not be able to advance past like company command. So one of those, and then a lot of those slots disappeared, and communications signal came in, and I was like, oh, communications, not the same type of communications, all tech stuff. So my soldiers taught me a lot.
Thank you for teaching me on the job, because I think I'm supposed to be in charge of you.
That's kind of how it goes, a lot of the soldiers train the officers. If you ask someone in the army, if you say, hey, I'm an officer, they'll be like, oh yeah, you're kind of useless. So you
One
usually don't admit that out loud. You're like, yeah, I was in the army. Oh, what were you? They ask what your MOS, and you're just, yeah, so I was 25 Alpha.
You just
Alpha
kind of
signifies
do one of
officers.
these and hope they can't hear you, and you just
Please
kind of
don't
mouth
judge
it.
me.
Yeah, just don't judge. One of my good friends, she is army, but I think she was a medic, and she is now a nurse. So hers, it
Very good.
applies and it makes sense. And
Yes,
she's also the reason
definitely
we're always
fits.
like, can we be kind with all of the fireworks? Because former soldiers are not a big fan of the fireworks. And
Mm.
around here, they're kind of like, hey, any kind of holiday, more fireworks. It's like, this is Thanksgiving. Why are there fireworks? Blow up the turkey. I mean, they don't really
Oh,
need an
that's funny.
excuse. So how much of that then went into Keeper of Sorrows? Because you got out of the army and you didn't start a bee colony, I don't think, at least not right
Mm.
away. I think your journey went
Well,
a little bit
I
off the
think
rails
so.
from that.
I guess I would have to like kind of rewind all the way back to like I started writing really young at like fifth grade. Best teacher, Miss Hartman, was like, "Oh, you're such a good writer," from like a little homework assignment you did to write a book. And I fell in love with it. And I remember that time, like growing up on the farm, we didn't have a computer or anything. So I would come in early to school and she let me type on her computer and she helped me illustrate. And I was like, I'd never really liked school before then. And that was like, this is what I want to do. But I wasn't very good. So I wrote my first book when I was at university. It was kind of like I would say a thriller mystery, but it was also garbage and couldn't
But you
couldn't
can
find an
see that,
agent
so that's the
because
important thing.
so I wrote another book in Afghanistan. It was a military thriller. I didn't know it was garbage, but it's definitely garbage. It wasn't good. So
Okay,
for me,
what's making these things garbage for you? Was it the fact that you didn't know how to do story structure, or were you still just working on your voice,
voice
or were you just
the
kind of like,
voice was
I'm putting words down? It was the voice. Okay.
it was bad. It was just really like on the nose, cringy. Like it hurt. It hurts my teeth to look at it now. Like it was really. But at that time, I didn't know. And there were actually a few agents because I had hundreds of rejections, and some of the agents were really nice. And they're like, "Hey, we love the premise of the story, but like you need to work on your voice." I was like, "Okay." So I kept writing, and it wasn't until actually, I'm the type of person where a lot of times I won't get into like a fandom until I travel there. And Game of Thrones was like really big. Well, I'd already missed the bandwagon in like 2017. Everyone was on it, but I didn't join it until I went to Ireland. And I was very immersed in the setting. And they're like, "Oh yeah, this is where Castle Black is." And then I started watching it, and I was like, "Oh, this is really beautiful." So I started reading the books. And Daenerys Targaryen, man, there's this part in the book where she comes out of the burning pyre, and the freaking dragons are nursing on her. And I was like,
Yep.
I want to write
Badass
it
right there.
Daenerys. That's what I want to write. And so that really like that moment. I decided I wanted to write a fantasy book. And so I punched one out in a couple months and hired some freelance editors to help me get it ready for pitching to agents because I knew how that was. And I was very lucky. This agent that I'd been following on Twitter, stalking basically, I pitched to them. And within 40 minutes, they're like, "Oh, let me see the rest of Naomi." But then she responded pretty quickly back. You're a little you have a little few too many POV characters. Remember, I was in Game of Thrones mode, so I had eight
I was going to ask,
characters, and I had to kill
how many characters were in this original
eight.
draft? Was
I
there
had
was
eight
there an entire
characters.
hive? There was an entire hive, Rachel. That's too many
Yeah,
characters. Eight,
I
eight is
wanted to
enough.
be like George R. R. Martin, you know.
Yep.
So yeah, I had to kill half of them, but revise or rescind. So I killed half, sent it back. I'll go. This is it. They're gonna sign me. We're just not really feeling the portal fantasy. Maybe you should send it to a different agent. I was like, no, I want you. I
You're
will
it.
rewrite my main character for you. And so I did. And the third read, Naomi Davis is like, hey, let's schedule a Skype call. And I messaged some of my writer friends. They're like, oh, they're gonna offer. And yeah.
And
So
they
that
offered
was
a
the
lot.
and that was in 20 that was right before the pandemic. That was in
Either
2019.
2019 or early 2020, because that's about when like everything started shutting down was March. So it could have been on that cusp there. But I wanted to say, so Game of Thrones has ruined so many authors because the thing is, when you do something so well, like George R. R. Martin does, he makes it look way more simple than most of us can do. And I think for me, I'm one of those people who I can't even manage to read multiple points of view when it's more than like three or four. I get lost. he's writing that many, and he just makes it look so simplistic. But when you back it up to the beginning, you realize that he started with a smaller cast and then kind of expanded. And a lot of groups do the same thing, like James S. A. Corey in his Expanse series. I don't know if you've read that. Okay, it's two guys. I say
I've
his.
watched the series. I haven't read it, but I've watched it and I freaking love it.
It's amazing, but the books are better, even though I do love the characters and the casting's amazing and the visual effects. I'm like, I want no gravity. How come I can't have no gravity here? But the way they do it is in the first book, you really only have 2 POV characters and kind of a third that's kind of in the background that you don't really get. And then the title is The Expanse. It expands from there. It's a little different in the series because some of the characters are in the first season that aren't even in the first book. But they do it in such a way that it kind of presents it to the audience in a way that you get your feet wet, you kind of learn a little bit about the world, and then you get deeper and deeper. And with George R. R. Martin, you start with basically just the Stark kids and Ned and like 1 or 2 extra characters, and you kind of can stay there with them. I read it about 100 years ago when it first came out. Found it at a library. Nobody had heard of it. I don't even know if the second book was out yet. And I was so pissed off when the book was not a standalone. I'm like, what the hell? This is just ending here?
I'm not okay with this. The ending of the first book, when like you're just shocked because you're like, but how? He's the main character. Why would you do this to me?
Like, this is unacceptable. And George R. R. Martin's like, I don't care. I'm doing this, and you will read the next one. And I did. I mean, I remember reading, I think it was the third one when it had first come out. I'm sitting there waiting to get on an airplane to Seattle going, I need to know what happens right now. And then later, everyone caught up with the show, and some people caught up like you did later to the show. But it really does kind of take that whole idea of how multiple points of view are not easy, but they can look easy. So people are like, don't you want 75 POVs? And most people, we can't handle 75 POVs. So I applaud that you realize, like, let's rein it in, but you still have more than one POV character here. So it's not like you brought it down to 0. And I wanted to ask about this. So when you say the dragons and the nursing, I know exactly where that finds its home here. But where was the first premise with this whole world? Like, did this go back to your agricultural roots? Did you get to have an apiary? And I really like that word because it's just like, it feels like you're mispronouncing aviary, or that there's monkeys involved. There's no monkeys. Like, why are bees apiary? That I don't understand language. That doesn't make sense. Did you actually raise bees? Is that where you got that idea, or did you just kind of?
I didn't, but my sister is a beekeeper, my older sister. And so we talk more about my sister in this, you'll see a lot of where the influence came in for that sibling rivalry. I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters, farm kids, lots of kids on the farm. But for me, actually, the voice, I don't know if you have voices that come to you. Maybe I'm a little crazy, but I heard a gargoyle voice talking to me first.
And instead of taking pills to make them go away, you wrote them down. Good response.
Yeah, and well, it's funny. So like going back to like the submission process, the reason that even came up in the first place, and we could talk more about this too if you like. So that first book that I signed with Naomi, it was pitched during the pandemic. It died, but during that time, there was a production company that was looking for an IP writer, and I saw who the production company was, and I was like, I don't have a chance, but I'm gonna try to write. I guess it was a historical fantasy trilogy. So I wrote a sample chapter, and the producer ended up loving it. He was like, yeah, let's write this trilogy together. It fizzled out at the end of that year. I was actually unceremoniously fired by his assistant, but the gargoyle conversation came up when we were talking about this fantasy trilogy. So and that is kind of what propelled me out. I'd already written another book during that time while working on this project that I, in fact, did not get paid for because of pandemic time. We were waiting for the contract to get signed for 6 months, and it never got signed. So,
and then you're like, I did all
lots
this
of heartbreak there.
But I do love how there's so much of that in this industry that doesn't get talked about. How you get asked to do something or create something on just some kind of prospectus or just a couple sample chapters, which might just turn into a couple more sample chapters, etc., which may or may not be what you were hoping to work on, but you do it because the opportunity is there. And unless you're established, you usually have to chase those opportunities. Like, you don't usually have the luxury to say, yeah, it doesn't seem like a sure thing, because so little in this business is ever a sure thing. So I love that you were able to say, okay, from that, this came out of it, and this piece I'm taking with me, and it inspired this thing. Because, okay, I knew from watching like your Instagram and following, I knew there were bees involved. I had then eventually seen the cover, but then when we get into like, what is there a gargoyle, I can't even say the word, doing with bees? That came out of left field, but it makes sense when you weave it into the whole larger story. And for those who haven't read it yet, first off, go read it. But there's two POVs here, so 2 points of view, and one of them were very grounded with the main character. I don't even know how to pronounce Naokah's name. Is that close enough?
Perfect. That's right, Naokah.
That one of the questions I had for you was, there were a couple places where the language felt like it might even be Portuguese, but I know this much Portuguese that I'm like, I'm probably making that up. Like there's a drink or a substance that sounds enough like the word in Spanish or Portuguese for honey that I'm like, is that where it came from? Or am I just wanting to find connections? Because I'm like, I know some foreign language this much.
Aw, I'm so glad that you picked up on that. Yeah, so what's been paying the bills for like the last 9 years is I teach English as a second language.
Oh,
And so
nice.
I have some regular students. I would say like a good 75% of my students are Brazilian. And
There you
so they would teach me about like you'll see a jabuticaba tree on the
go.
island, and those
Mhm.
are so fascinating. These trees have like these big black berries on the bark, so they look like eyes. And
Creepy.
so there's a lot of influence from my students and like from around the world to have students from all over, but definitely there's a big, big Brazilian influence in there that was kind of a homage to my students for putting up with me for the past 9 years and not
I'm sure they love you. I'm
getting
sure they
another
love you
teacher.
as much as your fifth grade teacher, that you love them, that they started you on that. So teachers make a good, I'm not just saying this because
Oh,
my husband's a teacher. I really do think that teachers make a huge difference, including ones who are doing things like you are, teaching a second language. And then what we take back as far as that influence, I love that, because I looked at this name and I'm like, I have no idea what, like, the whole, okay, well, what pronunciation do you start with that tells you? I'm the one who took Spanish in high school and then went to Brazil for the summer and go, this was the dumbest choice ever, but I did it. I went with a group that was doing an ecological study, so I know this much about
nice.
biology. And I was studying peccaries in a Sao Paulo rainforest, and I spoke Spanish as a second language. They spoke Spanish as a second language, and we met in the middle talking like toddlers, because some of them didn't speak English and I spoke almost no Portuguese, but I learned a little bit down there. And I found that hearing it completely useless, because to me it sounds like French. But if I could see it, it looked enough like Spanish. I could sometimes figure it out. But some of the words like miel for honey, and there was like melgo. I'm like, this is from either Spanish or Portuguese. I know
Yeah.
this stuff, but that's
Yeah,
all I
or
got.
even the island where it
Yeah.
takes place, Abeia, that is Portuguese for bee. So
Well,
yeah.
that makes sense. See, I didn't think I even putting even that together, because I don't
I
think
don't
I
know if
knew
I
the word.
pronounced that correctly. My students were probably Rachel.
And I feel like I should know the word for bee in Spanish, but it's been a long time, and most of that stuff I lost. But I was the one who, looking at the names in the characters for Les Mis, I can't even pronounce the whole musical correctly because I keep trying to do it in Spanish. And some of the characters, I'm like, I don't know what to do with this J. This J is probably something different in Spanish than it is in French. I don't know how to pronounce this character's name. Enjolras, no. And Hora, no, probably not. I got nothing. So someone who speaks French will have to correct me, so that next time I'll know what character Aaron Tveit played in the movie version, because I'm kind of in love with him. But that's fine. We're not going to focus on
I don't blame you. And I'm pretty much the
that's
same way. Google Translate is my best friend because
it
unlike
helps.
my brilliant students, I only speak English. I did study Spanish for 5 years and my partner's Mexican American. And so I'm trying to, unfortunately, so he grew up in Corpus. And so when he was growing up, they would punish him for speaking Spanish in school. And so he's having to relearn Spanish so he could teach our daughter, 10-year-old daughter,
Well, yeah, you
Spanish
want
as
to be
well.
able to learn both of them. And I grew up hearing Spanish because I grew up in Orange County. So I grew up learning both of those a little bit, but not at home. And I was actually very proud of my now late mother, because she took Spanish as an adult because she wanted to learn it as a second language. And it wasn't taught to her because she grew up in Pennsylvania. They taught her German. That was super useful,
Oh
but
yeah, I
not
mean,
so much here. So she was learning it as a second language, and she took classes in pre-Columbian and Chicano art because she just appreciated it. And I felt like I had a better advantage learning it a little bit younger because I was like in junior high and high school, and I took it up through college, but then I didn't keep with it. So now I'm pretty much useless with it. And I have some friends who are fluent, and if they actually speak to me in their normal speed, in their normal accent, I would just be like staring at them completely blank eyed. I'd be like, I'll wait for you to slow down and maybe just do some gestures because you lost me. So I'm hoping that, I'm hoping for your case that because your husband had it at some point, he'll be able to help you more than I have, because I didn't get much help.
Well, I have a big, I guess what's inspiring me, one of my favorite writers of all time, Carlos Ruiz Zafón. He wrote The Shadow of the Wind. I read it as a translation. And it's funny because the reason I picked it up, it was at a used bookstore sale in Fredericksburg for 25 cents, but Stephen King, I was obsessed with Stephen King growing up, blurb the cover, beautiful book. And I was like, oh, I got to read it. And it ended up being one of
25
the
cents.
most
Yeah.
beautiful books that I've ever read. And it had a big inspiration of the Gothic storytelling
Mm-hmm.
in this book as well. But so I read it in English and it was beautiful. And I was like, oh man, it's got to be better
I
in
got to read it in
Spanish. I got to
Spanish.
learn. So I have the Spanish, the original, and working my way through that
I love
because I
it.
learned most of my vocabulary as a kid reading. And so I feel like maybe that will help me with Spanish as well. So much so that it's really embarrassing. I have a master's in English. I started working on PhD in English. I didn't finish it because expensive, but the Army paid for my master's degree. But there are words which I was telling my Asian about this. In this world, there is a chasm in the middle of what
Mm-hmm.
happened, right? Because the
Right.
wind burns everything up, and a
Right.
chasm. But when I was growing up, I read that as chasm. So the whole time I'm
Yeah.
writing, and then I hear it on the
That's
radio, and I'm
good.
like, or like the TV, and I go, oh my goodness, I have been saying this word wrong the whole time. And this word is so prevalent in my book.
I know.
What if I had not heard this and I had like a big gathering and I said chasm and people are
And
like,
they'd be like,
wow, you're a writer? Like, what's wrong with you?
but here's the thing,
So
and I've heard
tomboy.
this and I love it. And it's never make fun of somebody for mispronouncing a word, because almost always it's because they learned it through reading it, not through hearing it. And there are a lot of
That's what
words that
I
don't sound the same. And there's certain words, like I know growing up, the words, okay, so I went to UCSD for my undergrad. It's in a place called La Jolla. And my mom did not understand that that was
yeah.
La Jolla, because it's
Yeah.
Jolla, and she grew up seeing things like the Georgetown Hoyas, which is spelled totally different with an H and an O. So a lot of it has to do with like linguistic background. So if you don't know the origin, you aren't going to know. And I mean, I still remember arguing with a neighbor that her favorite restaurant was not called Casa Maria. I'm like, no, that's just not it. It's Casa. We cannot disagree on this. It's Casa Maria. If you're going to go there,
Oh,
please just get that part right. But it's true, because a lot of us, we don't necessarily hear them and we may not make the connection between them. I'm like that with a lot of politicians. I know what it sounds like, but do you tell me how to spell their name? I'm like, no idea. I've never seen it in print. If you usually hear it versus see it written out, same kind of thing, because if you don't have an origin, something to anchor it to, how would you know? But I'm glad somebody helped you with chasm beforehand,
yeah,
because that would have just
well,
been really
yeah,
awkward.
it was so embarrassing. I told Naomi, my agent, about it, and she was laughing her ass off, and I was like, yeah, I'm
Well,
glad I figured that
thank
out
you.
beforehand.
Glad I could entertain you. Are you done? Like, well, and I also have that sometimes because different areas have different pronunciations for certain words. And
Mhm.
favorite examples, watch Great British Baking Show or Bake Off there, and they pronounce certain things. My daughter thinks the fact that they call mocha maca, she just cannot stop laughing at that. I'm like, that's just how it is. And I was recently listening to a book, and the narrator was British, even though it was written by someone who's Australian. And I'm like, okay, so I don't even know which pronunciation we should be using. And the word that was pronounced just a little bit off, just threw me, was skeletal. They pronounced skeletal. And I talked to one of my UK friends and I'm like, skeletal. And they're like, well, yeah, skeletal. That's British. I'm like, do you call it a skeleton? And she's like, no. But I'm like, well, then how do you get that? And she's like, I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
But and then she threw it in my face. And she's like, but we started the language. It was ours first.
Yeah,
I'm like,
that's
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, I have
Okay,
some
go
British
away,
friends too. That
British.
yeah, they're like,
Exactly.
there's no such thing as American English. There's English and the stuff that you guys screwed up.
Yes, exactly. We change some things. We don't know where you got that extra syllable in aluminum. There's no I there. I don't get it. Oh, and Regina says Pennsylvania pronunciations are kind of wild too. I'm assuming, Regina, you say PA meaning Pennsylvania, because that's my ancestry. And yeah, I've been there. And my mom used to have to learn how to pronounce things differently before she would do spelling tests, because the kids wouldn't know what an orange is. Orange. We
Oh,
live in Orange County. She's like,
Oh, that
orange,
is interesting.
orange. But again, it's all where you're from. So sometimes it
Yeah.
throws people off. And you do have some invented words in here or things that are your own. And Regina confirms it's Pennsylvania. Thank you. Yes, my relatives would say yes. I'm not related to Regina, but I have other folks across Pennsylvania who are probably like, that's right, you should get that right. Or they're going to disown me, and that's probably just as well too. But you have different languages going on in here and different cultures represented. So you have established a world in here that I said earlier, ruled by the bees, but it's not actually like ruled by bee people. So anybody who thinks that they're bee people, this is just me being silly. The people are not bee people, they are people. But we have people who are vying for the control over who controls the bees, who controls the birds. There's raptors. So like there's an early section where they're talking about people who are from this area, and the more elite are from the area that controls certain things like the raptors. So I'm just like, California condors, I'm glad you made it back. But also the whole idea of some areas being just permanently oppressed because of where they are geographically and what the agriculture did. And you never specifically say this is our future, but it's so easy to see this is our future. And I'm one of those people who's like, oh, the bee is on the ground, I better go get it, because I love little bees, and I'm trying, and they die out here pretty easily because it's hot and you want them to do better. But just the whole idea that if we don't have bees, all of our agriculture, and we have all these pollinators that we rely on, and if we aren't careful with what we do and what pesticides, we can end up in this world and you're not going to like it.
That's what I love about fantasy too, is a lot of times I think in our world we're very set from our upbringing, how we believe, the parties that we vote for, right? But what's really cool about fantasy is you could take something that's problematic, like, hey, the bee demise, and blow it up in this other world where different names and everything, and go, hey, this is a problem. And they go, oh, yeah, it is a problem. And you can change how people see things. So
without
I think
people
that's one
going,
of the
but you're going to make me put away my roundup. Like, we're not talking about that. There's no roundup. We're just talking about Lenita and Naokah, and Lenita is the older sister. So I'm assuming your sister's not actually named Lenita and you don't secretly hate her.
No, but
Okay.
one of my students, Lenita, is a farmer in Brazil, and she was a lot of my characters are named after students or people that I care about. So they don't have any resemblance in how they are, but I love that she was a farmer, and I was like, yeah.
I still name like don't tell my pediatrician. She's shown up in a couple of my books. Yeah, when it's a good name, and you're like,
villain
I
or
like this. No, it's just a good character, and it's just a good, strong
okay.
pediatrician name. And when I needed a pediatrician character, I didn't use that name. I used something else. So I just like, well, you are now over here. You're a marine biologist. Oh, you're the pediatrician. I never give real names of people to characters that are negative or anything like that. If it's a positive name, I do that. And if they are like, oh, look, my name is showing up in all of your rom-coms, I'm like, that's right. And I've only misspelled it a couple times or used your entire name. Sorry, my daughter's best friend or one of her best friends' mothers. But I've done that. But it's also a good way to like remember the names, because then you have a personal association with it. So Lenita being a real person, but not your actual sister. And then the sisterly relationship here, because as we start, we have a young woman who thinks she's walking into seeing the crowning achievement of her sister, only to find her sister. I mean, can I say her sister's not there? Like it's kind of a spoiler, but it happens. That's
like, kind of the premise behind it. Yeah, it's like that copy, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. I'm the kind of person who, like I said, I went into this one knowing there were bees, and that's about it. Because if I know I'm going to read a book, like if it's an auto buy and yours was, I don't want to know more, because I have a tendency to find that things on the back and things on the inside cover, if it's a jacket flap, tell you 3/4 of the story. And I don't want them to do that. And I know that they shouldn't, but a lot of times they do. And I would rather go in as ignorant as possible and get filled in by the author in their storytelling method, rather than tell you everything. And I know other people are different. Like you'll see people say like, oh yes, I read the first couple paragraphs to see if I'll like it, or I just read the back blurb and see if it sounds interesting. I am a who is the author, what is like the nutshell premise, that's like, I know yours was like who controls the bees, but I don't try to read more than that. And I definitely go by covers, and this one's it's just gorgeous. I love the cover you have. I don't know if you had any say in this at all, but it's just beautiful. And the fact that it feels like glass, it's just a lot of fantasy books right now, and I will get shot for saying this, they all look the same. They have a very similar feel, and I know that's because people want to be able to look at it very quickly and know this is a fantasy book, and the titles are very similar and the look is very similar. And I honestly wonder how people, without using Goodreads, will remember whether they've read something or not, because some of them, it feels like they just put all the same words in a bag, shake them up, and then pull them out like Scrabble tiles, and then arrange them, and then put them with a very fancy background. And that isn't what this is. And the premise isn't what this is. So I felt like this was one of the most original fantasy books I've read, while it still felt very true to being a fantasy. And part of it is that dual POV. So like I said, one of them, we've got Naokah coming on thinking she's going to see her sister's crowning achievement to find her sister is gone. Nobody can tell her what's going on. And oh, by the way, the achievement she thought her sister was getting is now basically up for grabs again, and she's got to compete for it. And oh, guess what? So there are all these other people who they also thought they were probably coming to see this achievement. But now it's like we go from you're going to see like, you know, the Emmys to it's Hunger Games, but not exactly.
Yeah.
So where did the idea for doing all this? How much of this came from prior books that you're like, I know I have friends who are like, once a book is dead, I just rummage through it for bones and take pieces. How much of this is something that came to you as like, this is the concept that's at the nearest moment?
It's funny. This was wholly original. Like it wasn't, I know a lot of authors cannibalize their other books. This book was so in between. I went on sub 3 times before my book sold, right? So the one that I signed with my agent, then I
Yes.
wrote another book that was very just totally different, very feminist, of course, but like completely different in a world where people lived in trees. And then this one came. I think this one leans most into like my true voice, and that I grew up reading Stephen King. I loved him so much. I love dark stuff. And I guess when I started writing fantasy, I thought all fantasy had to be pretty and colorful and rainbows and all these original things. No, man, like there is dark fantasy. And like, what I love about, and probably why this was a hard sell for publishers, because it's like, where does it go? It is dark fantasy, but it has a lot of horror elements, and it's kind of a high. Sunny Dean told me it was a high fantasy murder mystery, and she was comparing it to like this. I'm trying to remember the author's name, but I was like, that's the comp. Cause no one could help me come up with comp titles for the book
Yeah.
because it was just so everywhere.
Well,
Like
and
it sounds dystopian. People
it's
think it's
funny 'cause
environmental fiction, and like,
well, there
so
are
people
elements of
like,
environmental fiction, but what's funny is like yours came out the same year as probably the closest comp title, which is Francis White's Voyage of the Damned, because it's also a fantasy murder mystery kind of thing, but it doesn't start there. It starts in a different place, but you've got representatives from different factions or different places, and then people start getting picked off because, you know, that'll happen. But hers is definitely lighter in tone. This one definitely is darker, and I know one of the things I love showing, I'm a sucker for Venn diagrams. I have like a special place in my heart for I don't know why I do, but I do. And I love the Venn diagrams they show of speculative fiction, which is part of the reason why when I do the intro for my show, I say speculative fiction, because I think of myself as a speculative fiction author. I do the romance because I also write romance. That was an accident. I don't know what I'm doing with that. But with the speculative fiction, Stephen King, to me, he's a fantasy author. And I stand by that because my favorite works of his are fantasy. The Stand is a work of fantasy.
that's a beautiful one.
Dark Tower,
I mean,
it's fantasy. Yes, there are horror elements in it, and yes, he writes horror too. But my sister for years, not Lenita, but my actual sister for years, tried to get me to read Stephen King, and I'm like, I don't want to do horror. It's scary. I can't do horror. I can't do horror. And she gave me the gateway drugs of the fantasy works that are that world building, and his storytelling voice is so engaging that I'm like, all right, well, maybe I'll let him scare me a little bit. And then I would go into some of the darker stuff. And then, you know, next thing I'm reading Full Dark, No Stars. I'm going, what the hell did I just read? Because that's terrifying. But that's what speculative fiction is, with that whole larger thing where sometimes it's historical and sometimes it's horror and sometimes it's science fiction and sometimes it's fantasy, and there are places where they all overlap. And I love those stories. And I feel like yours really, I would say, yes, it's speculative. There's so many elements of all of it that, yes, it's fantasy, but as soon as you say that and people go, so is there like a Fae king? And you're like,
oh God, yeah. Or like people who don't even read, when you say fantasy, they think that you're talking about erotica. And I'm like, no, I don't write erotica.
no,
Nothing wrong with erotica. Go you. But I learned how to write sex scenes from reading Outlander, because I love Outlander. And that's a mix of like everything, right? But I wasn't a big romance reader. I stuck to Stephen King, and you're right. Like some of his best stuff, I feel like it's even like The Green Mile is a serial novel that came out first, and that's more like magical realism almost. You know, it's
well, and the term term that I'm learning and I would like to just start putting on everything is, so the term magical realism is supposedly only supposed to be used by people from either a Hispanic, and I also have seen it in Asian backgrounds, because it's a post-colonial response. And so it should be coming from a place of an author who comes from one of those communities. So someone like me who is, I'm pretty pale, and I don't have any ethnic roots that are not really just white bred somewhere in Europe. We've checked. There's nothing interesting. Like my kids have asked, do we have any interesting background? I'm like, no, I'm really sorry. Like the best we can do is claim to be part leprechaun, because we've got like a little bit of Irish, and none of that's real. But the term then, because I've looked into it, is like, okay, well, if someone is writing in a similar style but is not doing it from a place of post-colonial response, the term is fabulism. And I love that term. And what I'm working on now is actually fabulous, because it's that same kind of element where most of the world is real, but they're things that just couldn't happen. And that's what, and I love magical realism. And I, like you were saying earlier, I'm going to need you to send me the name of the author and that book that you have both English and Spanish. I'm going to start with the English, because I'm not kidding myself here. But I loved, one of the things I loved most about learning Spanish was that tradition, and that we were reading some of that as I got higher up, and they're like, you can actually understand some of this. I'm like, you're overestimating me. But reading some of these things, and things like Water for Chocolate and Woman on the Attack of a Nervous Breakdown, I can't remember how it is in Spanish, but some of these stories have these elements where it's mostly normal, but then something weird just happens and everybody's like, yep, that just happens. And you don't get that in a lot of Western culture. Western is in Eurocentric culture. And I love that. And I've read it also in Eastern culture things. And I was like, okay, so if I'm not coming from that place, am I allowed to write it? And if so, what is it called? And it's fabulism. And I love that. But I also still want to read as much magical realism as I can. So it's like, anybody who has one, send it my way, because I love it. And I also specifically love when the culture of the writer infuses it beyond just a background, but also into the language. Okay, Regina, you're full of it. I feel like Allison just gave us a masterclass in genre definitions. I did not.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I'm going to salute you now.
See, now you're salute. I'm not allowed to salute you back because I'm not in uniform, dressed like a beat. But also the whole idea of that part of our language, we communicate through our language, and telling someone whose their main language is not English that they cannot infuse that part of themselves in their work is just so limiting. So some of my favorite works have incorporated other languages. And yes, I'm biased because I've read several that have a lot of Spanish in it. And I'm like, I understand this because I understand enough that I'm getting it, or I can get it by context. And then I've heard that some of those authors have gotten pushback, like, oh, there's Spanish in here. It's like, and like that bothers like, you were willing to read all the words that were going back to George R.R. Martin making stuff up, and you probably heard a lot of Klingon and didn't complain when you're watching Star Trek. So the fact that you can't understand every single word, it's going to turn you off. Or how about you, I don't know, read it in context, and if you need to, go put it in Google Translate if you really like, I need to know every single word here. But one of the ones I read recently was How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water, and it was written in like beautiful Spanglish, because it was interview with a woman who's trying to get a job at an employment agency, and she's talking about what she's doing, and she just goes back and forth between English and Spanish, and most of it's English, but you can tell when she's like, I'm not really sure what it should be, so you know what it is, because she's talking to someone who also knows Spanish, and it's gorgeous. And I hadn't read anything else like that, but it was a great piece of what it's like to be coming from this place where you've kind of worked all your life, but not necessarily in ways that pay you well, and now the bills are coming due and you need to. It's just a great slice of life thing, and it's pretty short, but I enjoyed it so much. But I loved that aspect of both languages, and I want to see that more, because I will be honest, I read the entire Three Body Problem trilogy only in English because I speak no Chinese of any dialect. So that's not one I'm going to be able to tackle. But I love that when people do that, and I love how you incorporated the people that you know and the influences. And if you could send me a fruit salad tree, that would be amazing. That may have been one of my favorite ridiculous things. I'm like, Rachel, I know you made this up, but I love it.
Oh no, fruit salad trees are real.
No, they're not.
They're real.
Fruit salad? You just
I swear, real. Okay. the
Tell me
fruit
what
salad tree that I
culture fruit is.
created, it's not actually a real thing, but you can do a fruit salad tree. Like I read about this article that I read in Australia where if it's citrus, like you could have grapefruit and lemon and orange. If it's
Okay,
from the
see
same
that I
family, you
believe
can
if
grow
it's
it.
if you're
But it is a
grafting it
fruit
all.
salad tree.
But if
It's
it's
real.
okay, so that's more like a citrus punch tree because you're getting all those things. And I can see once you get it all together, it's pretty good. And maybe you've got like Sunny Delight while you're done. Actually, no, because there's nothing real in Sunny Delight. Who am I kidding? But I'm like picturing, those old terrible fruit cups that we got as kids where it's like the really red
Oh,
maraschino
cute.
cherry and
Oh,
probably pear and then some other white stuff. And I'm like, I don't know what this is. Not
it's
good
like, yeah.
fruit salad, but that's what I'm picturing growing off of this amazing
Oh,
tree
that's
that I'm like,
funny.
I know that was just one random thing, but for a place that is focused on agriculture and the bees and all this, I loved that. One of the other elements that you had in there a lot was the art and the murals and all these beautiful things that were brought in. And I can't get into too much without getting into spoilers of why they're there and who put them there and what their significance is. Was that something that was close to your heart with the art? Like you haven't shown us yet your bagpipe area. Do you have a painting area too? Because there's noticeably not a lot of bagpipes in this at all,
Yeah.
and I'm hoping the next book you do incorporates more bagpipery.
Actually, there is like, okay, so I have a book that needs to be edited that actually is about a bagpiper who dies and then comes back from the afterlife, but
As a bagpipe.
the henchmen from like the afterlife are like, hey, you're supposed to be with
Mhm.
us. So they come haunt her and she has to like team up with these other pipers in Edinburgh to try to overthrow them. But I haven't edited yet.
I
It's I
want
don't know
that.
if you've ever had a project where like you spent too much time away from it and then going back, like your heart just wasn't in it yet.
Yeah,
So I
I've
will
had that
finish
where
it.
you're like, yeah, where
I
you're
will
like,
go back
okay,
and edit it.
you need to have that passion there, and sometimes if the passion is at the point of a gun or at the point of like there's a promise for something to come from it, and then when that's taken away, you're like, I will, and then you're just kind of pawing at it like a cat, just beating it, but you don't actually have any brain power to do anything productive. Sounds like you're at least done with it because you need to edit it, but it's complete.
Edit it.
Where I am on the project I'm referring to is not complete, but I'll need to like get my whole heart back in there. Okay. Regina, I don't think that's true. She says if a story includes bagpipery, it is in a
God,
subgenre
should
called plaid.
let's
I don't
like
think
Regina
so.
over here.
Yeah,
We should
she's
add Regina
well.
on.
I see. It's funny because I don't think, to my knowledge, I don't have any Scottish in me. But I went to John Muir College. We had bagpipes at our graduation, and like there's been a lot of bagpipes showing up at special events in my life. I feel like they're almost stalking me, and I think they're really cool. But everybody else is like bagpipes, and I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. I learned as a small kid
Oh
that my dad
no.
played accordion. I think I just have a
Oh,
thing for really loud,
cool.
annoying instruments that most people are like, stop it. The thing is, you squeeze to make noise that hurts people's ears.
I think that bagpipes tend to be either you love them or you hate them. And usually people who hate them, it's because they heard someone bad, like probably me playing, and they were like, oh, that's a horrible
That to
instrument.
say? So, Rachel, how did
What's
you
that?
get into playing bagpipes though? Like, where did
Okay,
that
so
decide to just be like, yes,
this
I'm going to do
actually,
this
yeah, well, so I always wanted to learn. I just learned recently, actually. I'm like, I have 20% Scottish blood.
thing? Okay.
Yeah, but okay, one of my favorite movies growing up was Braveheart. And I love the music. And I love music. I almost majored in music. I was the marching band. I was a drum major. I loved music, except I'm tone deaf. I'm not very good at it. But anyway, the theme song to Braveheart, I was like, I want to play that. And again, military, movie, and all this stuff. I spent a couple
Yeah.
years in the Middle East and New York, and I was all over the place. But the pandemic, getting punched over again with getting rejections, I was like, I need to find something that is going to take me away from the craft because I'm in a really dark place.
Mhm.
I need something that's going to make me happy. And what really inspired me is my neighbor has like two teenage boys, and these little shits would be like, bam, 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 playing their video games at all hours of the night. My bedroom, and I'm like, all right, you little shits, you
I'm
want to be
gonna get a
loud? I
bagpipe.
can be loud. And I started taking bagpipe lessons. Unbeknownst to me, that bagpipe
We're
is
playing the
actually
bagpipes.
so loud. It's like as loud as a jet engine. So I had to get a booth. It's actually this little
There's
booth
your
right
booth.
here that I've
So
covered
you're a courteous neighbor,
because
but I love that. I cannot believe that during, because it was when he started saying during the pandemic, I'm like, oh God, not during the pandemic where no one can get away from it, but everybody's like home, and you hear about people doing making sourdough bread and stuff like that.
Sourdough,
But
flan.
well, Regina's correct. That is epic. And you did that. And like, do you have a bagpipe instructor? Or are you learning online?
Dude,
How
okay.
many people can teach you bagpipe?
So,
I feel like that's kind of
okay,
a
you
thing.
guys are gonna have to Google this. So this is really
Right.
funny. And so I've been to Scotland a few times, and one of the times I went to Edinburgh Castle, they had these CDs there, and it was the Red Hot Chili Get
Of
Pipers. Okay,
course.
so this bagpipe cover
That's
band,
terrible.
right?
Yeah.
And my instructor is actually he used to be in that band. They're a huge band. They
Were
tour the
they
States, they
actually
travel all over.
playing Red
They're
Hot Chili Peppers
fabulous.
music or just all
They do
sorts of
they
stuff?
do all sort they do
Okay.
Avicii, they do really anything. You look it up, they're absolutely amazing. But my instructor, he used to be one of the members there. So we took lessons. I mean, I took lessons like this, like Zoom, and
Yeah.
he was real kind and even though I'm terrible, I
But you know what? I'm sure he was just happy to get a student because I'm sure that's kind of rare that someone's like, I want to play bagpipes. You're like, are you sure? Because so my middle child is looking at wanting to play an instrument, and we need her to
Mhm.
settle on something for long enough for me to find an instructor before she changes again. Because my older daughter plays flute and she doesn't want to play flute, and my older daughter was supposed to play clarinet because that's what I played in band, and I'm
I
like,
play
that I can
clarinet
help
too.
you. I played clarinet and bass clarinet.
Okay.
So I'm like, I love it. That's what I did. And you're right. You don't really, I mean, you need to be able to tune yourself. But if you were the, drum major, you just need to keep time. It doesn't matter what sound like.
Exactly.
It's
Yeah,
like,
and I
I
was
can
like
keep
3 years of
beats.
it.
That's it. And
I
that's most
wasn't a good clarinet player either, to be
I'm
honest. I
sorry.
think that's why I became a drum major.
See, I was an adequate clarinet player, but my high school band instructor can vouch for the fact that I almost got knocked out of the advanced band because I couldn't learn my scales. And then when I finally learned the issue is scales are all math, they're not the melody. I'm like, I can play any melody you want, but you give me math, of course I'm going to fail. I'm going to fail all math. What do you expect from me? I couldn't do it. I could do my major scales, like the three majors usually, but you get into minors and my fingers are like,
The chromatic, right?
I don't like any of this, just hurts my ears. But I remember him lecturing me in front of the entire band going, when we had this really hard line in one of the marches on the bass clarinet, there were only two of us, and I nailed it. And he's like, how can you do that and you can't do scales? I'm like, because this is music and that's not. And he just had no response to that because he's like, well, she's right. So it's like, yeah, does it matter to you that I can't play my scales or can I play the music? I know that's
Exactly.
a requirement, but I can't do that one. Ask my math teacher. I can't do it. So sorry, that's why I, went to a school that
That's
didn't
so
require me to
funny.
take any math and went to law school because that didn't require math either. Yay. That's most
So
lawyers because
funny.
none of us could do any math. It's just not required. You're like, we have accountants for. You guys figure it out. But anyway, I love that you did an instrument that had a passion for you and that it brought you out of that dark place, because we were talking earlier about kind of your publishing journey and how you've managed to be both a debut and burned out all at the same time. And I just find that really efficient, honestly. So I'm sorry to hear that that's how you're feeling, because your book just came out within like the last
And
two, two
I'm
months.
so burned out. Like, well,
Oh,
I actually calculated. I realized ever since 2017,
yeah.
I've been punching out a couple drafts ever since 2017 trying to get published. And yeah, but it's funny. Like my friend Essa Hansen, she wrote the
Oh,
Graven
boy.
trilogy. Like
Yes.
you look at her,
She
she
has
had
been
her
on the
three
show.
books that came out,
Yes.
pandemic book, like
Mhm.
was really rough. She's burned out. She's working on her next thing, but we're kind of at the same place, but she just has books to show for it, you know?
Yeah.
My
So
my
she's like,
book
I have a
came
full
out that I
trilogy.
had
And you're
2
like,
other before then that were
yeah.
on sub that didn't come, and then I had the IP project that punched me in the stomach, so I'm like, "Yeah,
And
I'm
people don't get that
tired," like
because people see like, oh, so you're an author. Well, what books do you have out? And you're like, well, do you want to talk to the industry about what books they've let come out? Because there's a lot to show for what isn't here, and you can't see all that. And I know, like for me, I usually talk about the books that I have out because that's all I can point people to. So it's very weird for me because I'm like, I am a speculative author. What do I have? Here's a bunch of rom-coms. And they're like, are you confused? I'm like, very. But I have all these other books that either have been partials or have died on sub. I have two that I refer to as, they're kind of, I don't think the proper term anymore. I don't know if we can even use the term conjoined twins, but they are the conjoined twin books, because what had happened was I started writing a book
what it
and then was
was.
basically told, don't write this book because this premise won't sell. So I scooped, like we said, cannibalized. We scooped out the guts, put it in a new concept and a different mentality with like a different theme, and started writing that book. And then I was told later to go back and finish that book because somebody did want it. So I put a pin in that one, went back and tried to do that. But the main characters were all the same, and Inciting Intent was kind of the same. And now it's like, well, if I were ever to do something, one of them would have to change, because anybody reading both would be like, did you notice that these are exactly the same characters? I'm like, maybe. And they are. And some of them, they changed over the course of the book, but that's where it is. And now I'm writing my Fabulous project, and, it's slow going, but it is slow going when you're like, okay, you have this book that died on sub, and these books that got a little interest. And then there was the one that you wrote for this editor who really wanted to work with you, but didn't get their team on board. And you keep going. And it's one of those things where you can be both you can be not even debuted yet and be burned out, but also going, but I've gotten enough to keep telling me that there's hope, and that this is what, and that's what you want.
There's a chance.
Yeah, exactly. And meanwhile going, people are like, oh, and I love your rom-coms. And I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do those anymore. And it's not that I don't enjoy those, but it was like a very specific thing, and that I don't see myself writing more and more of those. Like, I've told those stories and those characters and I love them, but I don't want to be like, okay, I want to come up with a whole new group of people and do my whole thing. Partially because I don't feel like I have a whole lot new to bring to that. And I feel like there are people who do that so well. And my voice, I feel like, lends itself more to the speculative, but I could be wrong. I could just be like, it lends itself to whatever the industry is willing to pay me to do. So it's like, I am flexible. I will be very flexible. But it is frustrating when you're like, okay, I finally have this book out, and okay, now I have something else I need to write. And is it going to be the Pipers? Are you going to go back and edit that? Do you have something else that your heart is more leaning towards? What can you tell us about what you're working on now? And maybe you could just play a song for us. I'm kidding. Don't play the biped.
So now that Keeper of Sorrows has come out, I really like that tone. Like, I really want like the gothic setting, the psychological fuckery. I really love psychological books. I love narrators where you just don't know if they know what's going on. I like being screwed with, so I want to stick with that theme. And I feel like all the other ones, they're on the back burner. Maybe I'll change, but the new one, I'm going to write this. I need to find the right place to jump in. I don't know how many times I've rewritten the opening scene, and it's
so important. And if you're like, I don't know where this story starts, like, once you know and you're certain like it starts here, then you're good. But until then, you're like,
it's hard. But this one's actually going to feature birds. It's it's set the Victorian period, roughly Victorian. I learned with the Bagpiper book that I am not a historical fiction writer. Bless those folks who write historical fiction, because for me, I cannot get out of the details of, I need to look at what ship went across the Atlantic and the right name and the right class. And like, Rachel, it's a fan. They're ghosts in this book. Like, no one cares, but my brain does. So anyway, I'm going to say
coffee makers a couple days ago. Why does that matter? It matters. Okay.
But yeah, so Wales mining period. My husband actually sent me this lovely article about canaries, and that the mining canaries, there was this Scottish, I don't know what he was, but he invented a resuscitator for canaries. So when they went in the mines, the canary started flailing. They close the tank, pump oxygen in, and they would save the canary. And I was like, that is the coolest thing.
I didn't know they saved them, because that's the whole term, canary in a coal mine. The canary dies. I didn't know sometimes they didn't. Okay, Regina says psychological fuckery. You'll play kazoo and clarinet. Well, Rachel and I are both playing bass clarinet, so we're clarinet and bass.
Should we just become best friends? I must see that.
Regina's going to be our manager and play the kazoo and the theremin, which is good. And the best part is no one has to hear any of us sing, because with clarinets and kazoos, our mouths are busy.
Oh, that's funny. But yeah, so pulling into the psychological aspect of it, so in this world, there are women that are starting to think that they are birds. And this is very dangerous, because they don't realize that they have the constraints of humans, so they start dying because they're trying to fly and stuff.
Yeah, that's not something.
So it's kind of set up where a granddaughter, she's living with her grandmother, and she is one of these ladies that takes care of all these mining canaries. She loves birds. So how effed up that she actually starts to succumb to this illness. The granddaughter, like, there's some doctors that, hey, let's take her to this asylum, we can fix her. And she's like, no. Her grandmother does something where she's like, okay, I have to. So she lets her grandmother go. But like, her grandmother, during these kind of she had these prophetic rants where some of these things that she said are starting to come true with these kind of bizarre things that are happening in nature. So granddaughter runs, goes to the asylum, gets on
Mhm.
a Hanson cab, right? The asylum is no longer there. It's gone. It never was
Where did
there.
I put grandma?
Yeah.
It's like
So
the
now she's
beginning
trying to
of
figure out, where is grandma? Where's the asylum? Am I going mad? And she's kind of
yeah.
having to dig into like family secrets. And it's kind of a homage to miners and the
Oh, I love
canaries that really helped, fuse the Industrial Revolution, the steam engines, the trains. Like, I also
well,
just found out I have Welsh blood, like a lot of Welsh blood. And I'm like, this is like
Well,
meant
you
to
had
be
me
like.
at Asylum, but as soon as you also said like we go back and it's not there, it makes me think of the scene in Thor Ragnarok where Loki and Thor show up. It's like, well, I left him right here, and there's just like a place. It's like, so we just left, you know, the Odin guy. He's just gone now. Oh, we don't know. And then they figure out where they left him. But it's just like, yeah, we just left Grandpa here, and he's just gone because the whole building not there anymore. But you really did have me at the asylum, and all that stuff sounds absolutely gorgeous. And I'm glad you clarified Welsh, because I was 99% sure when you said Wales, we were talking the country and not the fish. And I know fish, they're mammals, but you know what I meant. We're clarifying whales spelled without the H, just no citation
Which is
necessary.
cool too, because Welsh is such a beautiful language, like getting to pull some of that in when I'm world building too, where, yeah,
Unpronounceable.
it's very unpronounceable. It looks very fantasy, actually, right?
Well, I love all the Welsh names. My middle child has a Welsh name, so she keeps thinking she's Welsh. I'm like, you're not. I named you that, but it's because I like the name. You are not. You're not actually Welsh. It's just. I mean, my two daughters both have essentially the same name in linguistic meaning in two different versions. So one
I
is
love
Irish
that.
and one is Welsh. And
What is
then
it?
so Fiona is my eldest, and that means it usually means fair or white or
Hmm.
pale, and she has no pigment, so that's perfect for her. And then Bronwyn means white breasted or fair, and
Oh,
and
that's
it's
really
like
Bronwyn. That's
it's like the
pretty.
one easy to pronounce Welsh name, and people still get it wrong. And they're like Brownin. I'm like, you're dyslexic, but thank you. The W's after the
That's
N. So
beautiful. I might steal that for
yeah.
a name
Well,
and a.
you're welcome to have all my children's names. They're already in Miss Peregrine's School for Unfamiliar Children, or for Unusual Children, or whatever it's called. I hadn't even read it, and somebody asked me, she's like, "Oh, did you like that? Because there's a Fiona and a Bronwyn in there." I'm like, "There are really? My kids are in that?" And then my youngest is like, "Is there a Rafferty?" I'm like, "There's no Rafferty. I'm sorry, sweetie. You and Jude Law's kid. That's the only Rafferties." And yeah, that is where I got the name. I'm not going to lie about that.
Oh, that's
He looks
funny.
just like his dad too, but that's okay. But yeah, that I love the use of that. By all means, please. Yeah, no citation. Thank you, Regina, for getting that correct. No citation necessary is the name of Psychological Fuckery's concert CD. Yes, it is, and it'll be put on by the Red
Put
Hot.
that link down there.
Exactly, exactly. But Rachel, we've gone for almost an hour, and I could easily keep talking to you for like another hour. And I do have a couple questions I will ask afterwards, just so people aren't like, you're now just babbling about publishing nonsense. I'm like, but yes, it's fun. I am just so happy that this is out in the world, and I want to read more things by you. And you talked a little bit about the psychological fuckery, and I will say it is because the two POVs here, like one of them is very grounded, and the other one has me going, what? To the point where I was like, maybe I should be taking notes and adding the clues up the way you do with those little charts where you're like, if it's this and then not that, but then she says this, so it can't be that. Oh, I thought it was this. No, but it can't be. And like you're crossing off suspects in your head of who, where, when, and what is happening. And the thing I love about it, and I will not throw this other very well-known author under the bus, even though all my friends know how angry I am about the second book in their series, but that's not the point. That because you go back and forth between the grounded and this ethereal messing with you, you never get too lost, because you're always like, you're moving forward, and then you stop and you read this one, and they're usually shorter chapters too, where you're
Mhm.
dealing with the, where is she? What? Oh, she's seeing that. Oh, I thought it was her. Oh, no, what's happening? Oh, that's not good. And then you go back to Naokah's story and her relationship with, okay, did I put it? Oh, I do. Her relationship with Brielle. Can you see
Yeah.
Brielle? Beautiful.
Yeah.
Like I had to ask him, like, which lesbian relationship is that? Because there's more than one in
Yeah,
here.
because it's
I
lots of
was
lesbian
considering
relationships. It's all like
the one, but no, there's
it's very
multiple.
very female women like centric,
I
like
love
a
it.
lot of. Yeah.
My first book that died on sub, was pretty much all female characters, and it was female friendship and mother and daughter type things. But I'm like, I don't think the men even need names. I mean, does anyone care? I didn't care. Just name the women, because that's who's important. But this one has just great friendships and sister relationships and extended families explored, and all sorts of things, and even the roles of servants to people who, like, okay, is it your job or is it your calling? All of that is explored in such a beautiful way. And a lot of times those side characters in fantasies are like, yes, post holder number 3, like they don't get even a personality, let alone here you had us actually thinking that guy could be a suspect. You see what he just did to that fox? I am not okay with that. Like all that stuff.
The farmer.
But yeah, like those characters were still brought to life in a 3-dimensional way. So I can't wait to see what you're going to do next. I know that you don't have anything like out for us to go get right now. So since this one just came out, go get this. And I'm just excited to keep reading and keep cheering you on. So everyone, thank you so much for watching. If you're watching live, thank you. If you are watching on YouTube, please press like and subscribe. And that way it's Vox Vomitus channel. You'll get my show, you'll get Vox Vomitus, you'll get Let's Scare Jennifer to Death. All of it's on here, and probably also the Voxies, which are an entirely made up award show that we do sometimes. So it's all fun. Thank you, Rachel, for joining us, and we'll see you next time. We should be having Nicole Bocat on this Wednesday on Vox Vomitus, assuming everything on November 5th does not explode to the point where we're like, we are not doing that. So stay tuned. We're hopefully going to see you then on Wednesday.
Bye.